So I know I'm extremely late to this topic, but the reactions to it have been better as the time goes by. And the story is Joe Rogan has bought a sim racing rig, a complete one, from a company called Podium One a couple of months ago. And this sim rig apparently cost around $63,000 assembled. I want to raise 2 points about this. The first point is about the reaction from the sim racing community to this specific story, because it has been incredibly funny. I've seen in the deleted Reddit topic that the bill of materials for this sim rig is around $30,000 to $40,000. That means apparently Joe Rogan was overcharged or was fleeced of $30,000 about this sim rig. This is where the sim racing community actually migrated to. It's a ripoff, all of that. Lots of accusations coming around, fleecing, overcharging, essentially thieves. And from that point onwards, there's also the reaction that I'm finding incredibly funny from the Podium One owners, because they went out and started insulting the sim racing community or these commenters as well, to the point, if I were, buying a sim rig like this, I wouldn't look at Podium One. I understand where this is all coming from, especially when you have your company targeted in a way like this. I understand that the reaction to it might be very personal, but there's still this thing that some company owners need to understand. They need to distance themselves from social media. They shouldn't have contact with social media whatsoever. I understand the reaction to it, but it's really not good. It's not acceptable in my opinion. So for the second point, do I think that Joe Rogan or Snoop Dogg, apparently you got the one as well, was overcharged by being sold a $63,000 rig when it is around $25,000 or $30,000? Well, no, I don't think I was overcharged, and I'll tell you why. We have to put everything in context. All of these conversations start to make more sense when you put everything in context. One part of the context is, for this conversation, you have to remember that I do budget sim racing videos every single year. I put lists out, doing budget upgrades, how to do an upgrade. That is also very interesting. You should check all of my videos. That sim racing is for everybody and all of that. But I also don't think that this was a situation where he was overcharged. And I'm going to explain that why. We have a very different way to operate. When you look, myself or you look to buy a sim rig, let's say we have a budget of $5,000 to buy a complete sim rig like that one I have in the back with the TV and all of that, or with the ultra wide. You have plenty of components and you have to put all of those components inside of a budget. That means you need, in certain ways, you need to figure out where you're going to rationalize your purchase. You need to do review checking. You need to check companies. You need to check brands, models, and all of that for every single piece of your equipment. That means for every single piece of your equipment, very easily, if you're like me, you're going to spend 5-10 hours. So when you put everything together, it's 60 hours, basically, of time that you have spent. And this is just the investigation part. This isn't really the purchasing part. Just for investigation, very easily you can spend a week and a half, probably even more if you really want to be thorough, to know that your money is going into a rack place. And then this is just before the sim rig arrives to your place. The sim rig arrives. Some things come slower, some things comes faster, depending where you're going to buy. Then you have to assemble it yourself. Very easily, you're going to spend 15 hours in that. And that's even ignoring the parts like RMAs or warranty claims that you need to make, where you're going to have downtime if you don't have a spare. That means you not only incur all of the situations of assembly and figuring out what you're going to choose and RMAs and warranties and all of that. You have to remember every single hour you do, supposedly, if you do it correctly, there's always a dollar cost associated with it. So for the sake of the argument, let's say you earn $50 an hour. That means roughly around $100,000 a year. That means for 50 or 60 or 70 hours, you can spend, in theory, $2,500 to $3,500 in labor. But the labor for yourself is free, but you're doing it for yourself. But still, it is time that you are spending because you didn't want to spend money on somebody else's time. I'm saying this because for 99% of the people, that includes me and pretty much everybody else that I know, money is more important than time. That's why we spend time assembling it. We might rather do it ourselves than to send this to somebody else. But the difference between us and guys that buy these pre-built sim rigs is that time is more important than money. This is the big difference between guys like Joe Rogan and us that makes for them buying something that is pre-built so much more interesting and makes more sense than buying something, spending less money and buying the parts and then assembling themselves. Pre-built sim racing companies are actually more common than you think, but we normally don't see this. We normally see this as something unreachable, or we don't actually think about it, because for us, most of us are thinking of, what is expensive sim racing? It's basically buying a pair of active pedals and a SimiCube Ultra, whatever it is. And that's basically it. That's the ultimate thing. But for people like Joe Rogan or people that buy these types of sim racing rigs, for them, that's really not the thing. For them is something else, which is a service they get from a pre-built company. This means a few things that you and I are not used to. This means that you're going to have, instead of you having a look towards the list of whatever it is on the market, they'll talk to a service rep. They'll say, I want this with this and that. I have this type of budget. And then you're going to have somebody custom build something for you with a set of specifications. They'll, of course, give you probably some choices if you want to do some customization on your part. And actually, they customize it with some sort of powder coating gray, which I know it looks like regular silver from the extruded aluminum, but isn't. So they essentially cater the buying experience to you. It's something completely different that we are not used to. People like Joe Rogan, they really don't care what it's best. If it's a Moza, if it's a SimiCube, if it's a Fanatec, it doesn't really matter to him. He just wants to get something that works and has a very good performance. You'll leave the choice of the equipment to the other guy. It's for them, it's time that he's not wasting. He's buying that time from somebody else, because for him it's cheaper to buy that time than do it himself. And then there's, of course, the part of the assembly. I would assume that Joe Rogan will be somewhat competent using it, but it's going to be the first time for him doing something like this, which means it's going to be very difficult for him to set up the force feedback or get the triple screens correctly, which essentially, once again, you're buying the expertise from another company that will do it for you. And then there's the last part. Well, for the rest of the mortals like myself and yourself, if we have an issue with a part, that means you're going to have downtime. It happened to me with my computer. For example, my graphics card basically exploded. I had issues with all of the computer. Essentially, I had a downtime on the computer last year, and I had no computer for a month. For me, it was catastrophic. But for somebody like Joe Rogan, he doesn't need to think about warranties or doing the RMA or this and that. He'll have somebody taking care of his backups. He'll have somebody taking care of his equipment. And that means for sim racing, he's going to very likely, especially if he buys with a company like this, he's going to likely have a servicing agreement with them, which means if he has a problem with, with the wheel, he'll phone them. Look, I have a problem with the wheel. They'll bring a van in with the spare wheel if necessary. They'll do the troubleshooting. And then if the wheel is down, there's going to be a new wheel, and you'll have it within a specific time. If it was for me, I would need to wait, 7, 14, 21 days for an RMA. And for Joe Rogan, probably doesn't want to spend that much time. Now, for a lot of people, they will look at the price that he paid versus the MSRP. For somebody like Joe Rogan, the equation is totally different. He looks at the price of it versus peace of mind, versus the servicing, versus downtime, versus whatever else I don't have to spend time with messing about doing it for it myself. That's why you're going to see always with these types of companies, you're always going to see a lot of a market or a value that's going to be added on top of it, which for you doesn't make sense at all. And for me, I wouldn't pay for it, but I do understand why it happens. And it happens because these guys are not building sim rigs for you and me. They are building it for a very specific niche of persons that will take time over money every single day of the week. And with this, I want to circle back to the other video I done a couple of weeks ago. When you have a situation like this, when you spend a lot of money in a sim racing rig and you aren't really as serious into sim racing than somebody that is spending $200 in a G29. And that's basically it. What do you think about this topic? Let me know in the comments below.